And we are live.
All right. Omaka, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, ma.
Okay. So yeah, I think we don't have so many people on the screen right now. So I'm assuming some of them are screening from are watching from YouTube, right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Okay. So guys, yeah. So drop a message so we can at least know you're with us. My name is Marv, and I'll be taking you in today's session. We'll be talking about JavaScript control flows, basically, and we'll also be looking at conditional statements in JavaScript. So let me quickly share my screen. I'll be using VS Code, and I'll be running my code with Node.js. Um, yeah, so just in case you have not used either of that, I'm going to share my screen and first show you the browser. So just give me a minute to do that. Right. Okay, so if you can see my screen, all you're seeing right now is Node.js. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, so you can also download this. Oh yeah, I think someone did that already. Okay, so I'm currently, let's see. Let me also zoom in. Okay, so this is Node.js. I'll be using Node.js to basically run my code. So if you're using a Windows machine, if you're using a Linux operating system like Ubuntu or Mint OS, you can actually download this. Of course, it has different flavors for different operating systems. I'm currently using a Mac, so I'll definitely have to click on this option, which has a long-term support. So if you're working with Node.js, try as much as you can to use the option with long-term support, right? And as you can see, recommended for most users. Now, the other option here, which is the current option, of course, it has the latest features, but it's highly recommended to go with the long-term support option because in most cases, this might have bugs and there might be some fixes going around the internet. Yeah, so let's stick to this. Click on this option to download the version 18.15.0. Um, I'm not going to download this now because I already have it installed. And Node.js is basically an engine that you can use to run JavaScript outside of your browser. So ideally, I'm sure you know this already by now, JavaScript runs on your browser. But when you use Node.js, you can basically run JavaScript outside your browser. So I'm going to be showing you an example before we start talking about JavaScript control flows. All right, so let me share my um, VS Code. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to zoom in as well. If you can't see my screen clearly, please let me know. Right now, this is basically um, yeah, so I have hello world right here. In order to run my code, I have to open up the terminal. So of course you can use a shortcut. Or you can simply click on the view button on your yeah. You can basically click on view on VS Code and then open select terminal. There's a shortcut for that as well. I think on Windows it would probably be control. I'm guessing right now, but I guess it should be control plus apostrophe. Now I'm guessing, I'm not very sure because on my Mac I use the command plus the apostrophe sign there to open up the terminal. So, but yeah, you can click on view. And then select terminal. You would have access to the terminal right here. Okay. And right now, this is basically where I would run my code using Node.js. In order to test if Node.js was installed successfully, I can just run Node, and it will take me into this environment called the REPL, REPL. And yeah, so we'll talk about the repo in a different session. But for now, it's obvious that I have Node.js installed. I'm currently using version 16 because I used NVM to set this specific version. But in your own case, if you download version 18, you will definitely see version 18. All right, so let's leave that environment for now. I am going to run this file that you see right here using node main.js. Just to see that everything works fine, we have hello world, right? And I'm showing these examples because I believe some of us are new to working with Node and JavaScript. So as you can see, this workflow works perfectly for us right now. So we can proceed. Okay, so I'll be looking at the chat in case you have any question. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to be looking at right now, we're going to start off with working with if-else statement. Then we'll move on to work with the switch statement in JavaScript, and we'll then move on to work with for loops. Right. We have other options. We have the while loop. Well, let's work with these three basic options for now. One thing I want you to understand is there are different ways to achieve the same thing when working with JavaScript. But for now, we are going to take it one step at a time. So in case you see, a different method and it works, that doesn't mean what you're learning right now is false, right? So, and I'm just saying this for those of you that are getting into programming probably for the first time. You would eventually see, things done different ways, but of course with the same result eventually. Okay, so let's take it one step at a time. We're going to start off with the if-else statement. All right, so I'm going to give a very simple, let me zoom in one more time. Okay, so I'm going to give an example here. So let's assume you're working with, you're giving an instruction. We're saying print, let's say print the value of, print 10, right? So I'm going to say print 10 if the value of A is 5. So this is a very simple condition. So we have a value. I'm going to declare a variable right now. So this is let A equals 5, okay? So we have the value of A as 5, which means wherever we see the variable A, it's basically pointing to the value of 5. And, using our condition right now, we're saying anytime the value of A is 5, we want to print 10. Or if we're trying to run this, if the value of A is 5, print 10, we are basically going to use the command if, the if statement, basically, right? So I'm going to say if a equals 5, right? And then we're going to basically say console.log um, 10. So this is quite, this is straightforward, right? If a equals 5. And I want you to understand that when you are working with conditionals, the equal sign you're seeing here is basically an assignment operator. This is when you assign a value to a variable. So don't be confused, okay? So this is assignment, right? And when you have this, let's put that on a different line to first explain what they are, right? So this is assignments. Okay, so this assignment operator. I'm going to assignment operator, and then you have this option right here. So this is basically used. This is basically used for you're basically conditionally you're basically checking. Um, so this is okay, yeah. So when you have this, you're basically checking for the value. You're basically trying to check if the value is equals, what you have on the other end. And I'm going to show you an example. But we then have the triple equal sign, which is basically going to check for both value and type. So I wanted you to first understand this without using any crazy term or grammar here. So very straightforward. This is for assignment. Assignment meaning that we're assigning the value to the variable, and this is used for checking the value, while this is used for checking for both the value and the type. So if I say if a equals 5 with the three equal sign right here, it means I am basically checking if the value of a and the type of a equals 5, right? I mean, if you have this, for example, this can also work because you have 5 there, which is the value, but not the.
Hear me? Hello, Mav. Hello, can you hear me? Hello guys. Can you still see Mav's screen? Ella, can you hear me? Hello.
Oh yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, I think
Sorry.
Mav just left the stage. Probably his network or something.
Yeah, I noticed too. So I think we just have to wait a bit for
Yeah,
let's say
he'll
a
be
few
back shortly.
seconds. I think he's here
Yeah,
already.
I think it's already back safe. So, hello guys. While we're waiting for Mav to come back, I want to say if you're yet to follow us on Twitch, please go ahead and follow us on Twitch. If you're yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Okay, Mav is back. Hello, Mav.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. I got kicked out of the session. I think my network. Yeah, the
Okay.
network. So I believe I'm going to take this again because I'm not very sure where we left off. So I'm going to take this again, and I'll start from here. So I basically explained that when you have the single equal sign here, it's basically an assignment operator. When you have the double equal sign, we're basically checking for the value, and when you have the triple equal sign, we're basically checking for both the value and the type. Okay. And I also said if you have something like this, if a equals 5, it means you're basically checking for the value. But if a equals 5, of course, with the triple equal sign, you're checking for both the value and the type. Okay. And at the end of the day, we're going to print this message back to our screen. I'm currently sharing my screen. Please, if you can't see my screen, let me know. Someone said we can't see his screen, but we can hear him audibly. Please check. Let us know from those of you watching on Twitch. Let us know if you can see my screen. All right. So now you see we have this value printed out to the screen, which is 10. That was the initial, example. I'm going to run this again. So let's see what we have. It says the value is correct. All right, which means this works. Okay. So this is your a simple if statement, right? We have the if else statement, and I'm going to be showing you the if else statement right now. Let's work with a different example. So I'm going to take this off. I'm also going to take this off. Right. So let me put that again so it will be together. So this is the if statement, and this is just our previous example. So or let a equals 5, and I said if a equals 5, so the log value equals 5. Okay, so that was our first example, which is the if statement. All right, so I'm going to call this if code, or just if code. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then I'm going to duplicate this file. I'll share this file with you when I'm done. So this is going to be the if else code. Right. So let's talk about the if else code, or the if else statement actually. Okay, so the if else statement, of course, similar to the if statement, but now you have different. You're checking when the value is true or false. So you're checking for both scenarios. So I have a value, for example, age, right, of 10, and we want to say, okay, we need a specific age of someone that could drive. So I can basically say if age equals 18, right? Or greater than or equal to 18. I'm sure you've seen this kind of operator. So this is greater than or equal to. This is equal to, right? I mean, if it's equal to 18, if it's greater than or equal to 18, then let's say John 5, okay? So, and I'm just picking that name randomly, of course, but else, also log, this is John can not. Okay, so this is a very simple example. We have a default value here, which is the age, and we're saying if age equals if age is greater than or equals 18, then John can drive, else John cannot drive. Now, from looking at this, of course, if we run this, this is the if else code. It's going to tell us John cannot drive because obviously John is not up to 18, right? So I hope you're with me. Okay, thank you. All right, so this is our simple if-else statement. We have a shorthand for writing, these statements. I'm going to show you the shorthand towards the end of the session. If you have, and I usually advise people to only use the shorthand if it's a very simple, case, right? Very simple case. You don't want to squeeze a bunch of complexity into a statement, and people, when they look at your code, they won't really understand what you're doing, right? It's possible to really minify your code, and it's a great deal, when you have a code that is short and does something and does that particular thing well. But at the same time, you don't want to confuse people all in the name of having a very short code. All right. So please learn to at least know when to be explicit. All right, so this is our simple if-else statement. Next, we are going to be, talking about the switch statement, and I want to make this fast. If you have any question, please feel free to drop your question. Remember that you can actually check for, less than or equal to. You can actually, combine some of these operators. And as a matter of fact, we could even like extend it. So we have like or, all right. If you have a different, operation, you can actually add that here. So you can say country, that country equals US or Nigeria, anything you want to put in here. So you can say, and you have or country equals US. All right, so you can actually use the or operation or the and operation, just have this in mind. All right, so let's take this off for now. And I'll basically create a new file now, and this is going to be the switch code. All right, so looking at the switch statement is basically used to execute a specific code based on the value of a particular variable. Now it works like the if statement, but I think looking at the structure, the way it is organized, it's quite easier and probably I would say better, to work with a switch statement if you have a bunch of cases. We usually advise people not to write things like this, and I'll show you an example. Imagine you're working with multiple cases, so you expect the users to send in either maybe English, okay, or mathematics, or chemistry, or biology. So we have these cases right now, and you don't want to say, let's assume let subject equals. So you are expecting either English or mathematics. Um, this is just an example. Don't do things like this. And so we have multiple options here. So let's say we have this set of options, and we are expecting the user to pass in to select an option, probably from the browser or maybe from like a mobile device. It's going to send in that input, or even from the terminal. You're going to send in that input. Now you don't want to say if subject equals English, English, right? Do this. Else if else if subject, that is subject, equals maths. Now, of course, I mean, this works. If you have like probably just two cases or three cases, it doesn't really, it's not a big deal if you're using this, but I think it's better when you work with a switch statement, because then you have a, organized code structure. So, I mean, you might have seen stuff like this. So you can say console.log, the user selected English. Now, this is just an example. So imagine using the if statement for every operation. Some people would probably just go ahead to do this. They have multiple if statements in different lines. I don't think that is very good, and I'm sure you don't think this is good either, right? So you don't want to have multiple if statements, and even if you have else if, this might work. I mean, it might be cool if you're just working with maybe two or three cases, right? But imagine having 10 cases here where you have to select, if subject equals English, do this, else if subject equals maths, do this, else if subject equals, it's not going to be very elegant. So this is the kind of scenario where we advise people to work with the switch statement, all right? So work with the switch statement, and I'm going to show you how to write the switch statement. Before I do that, I think I probably skipped something, because after the if else statement, we basically have if else if else. All right, we'll do that shortly. Immediately we're done with the switch code, we'll definitely touch on that. All right, so that is what you saw me do right now. I'm going to add a file, and throw in that code into that file so that you can have access to the code after the session. So let's work with this switch statement. Now we have our subject, we have the options. These are the options we need. In order to implement this using switch statement, we're basically going to say switch, and we're going to switch the subject, of course. So then we are going to have different case. So the first case would be English, right? So we'll have English, and now that we have English, we are basically going to tell the code, okay, what happens if English was selected. Maybe you have a function somewhere you want to call, right? So we have like function. Let's call this print subjects, right? So print subjects, if that makes sense. So log value, because I don't want to, I just need a function I can call in here that makes more sense, so I can just call this, and I can pass in a value of English, right? So English to this, all right? So when you're done, you have to break. So basically you can write a bunch of code here, okay? You can start saying let this equals that, you can perform a bunch of operations here. I don't want to do that, so I think I like this. I like it this way. The semicolon is not it's not important, right? I'm fond of, putting it, but it's not compulsory at all. So we can have multiple cases now. The next case here might be, I'll take this one step backwards. So let's go back. All right, so this will be maths, right? And give us maths. Okay. Now this is actually, better than writing a bunch of if else and um, yeah, this is way better. So you can actually, put a different case again, just like this, and this will be chemistry. right? So this makes sense. It means if we go ahead to set English right here, I save, I'm going to run this code just to see if that works. So we have switch code, and now you can see we have English. If I change the value to maths, I run this, you see it gives us maths, and of course, if I change the value to chemistry, because we only checked for those three cases, we're going to have chemistry, right? Because that was basically what we passed in. Of course, we can extend, what we're doing here to even be more. Um, so I can say the user selected, right? So the user selected chemistry, all right? If I change this to English, it's going to say the user selected English. Now, it's also a good idea to have a default option. So you have a default option, and that default option will be called when there's a selection that does not exist within the set of cases that we have. So let's say we put in physics, right? We don't have the physics option there. So physics or bio, okay? So we don't have the bio option in there. All right. So if I run this now, you see nothing happens, and that is probably you want to probably have like a default case. So we can just say console.log you did not select a valid case, right? A valid subject. Also remember to break that. So let's break that. Okay, so now we have a default option. So if I run this again, it tells us you did not select a valid subject because there was no valid option. Of course, we don't have bio in our list of cases. Now this makes sense, and this is easy to understand in terms of the structure. So if you have any question, right, before I jump back to talking about the if statement, you go ahead and drop your question in the chat, and I'll take them right now. Okay. So someone is asking, can we get a recording? Of course, there will be a recording. All right. So I think this is you understand this already. Let's move on. Okay. So we are going to talk about the if else if code, right? Okay. So we have the if else if code. So basically, what we are going to be doing here is let's just assume we have like a name. So let name equals Mav, right? And we have age. Let's age equals 40. And I'm basically going to say if age is greater than or equal to 40, console.log, let's put 45. Console.log, um, this user is too old for that. Okay, and I'm going to say else if. Now, else if, of course, remember to add your condition, because now you are saying else if, it means you have like an extended condition. You have a condition that you want to include in our list of conditions, basically, right? So we're going to say else if the age equals 40. I'm going to say console.log its user age. Okay, so we're going to work with the name, shortly. We're definitely going to work with the name. Let's test this to see what we have right now. So I'm going to say node if else, if else if code, right? So it tells us this user is of age. I mean, ideally, the user is not greater than or equal to 45. It's basically 40. So this is what we expect to have. Now we can also say else. Right, so we can actually say else. Else is going to be kind of like the base condition if this is not positive, okay? So if our condition is not positive in both cases, then this would happen. So a scenario where our condition is not going to be positive in both cases, if we have like 41, right? I'm simply going to say console.log. This user is tired of all this, okay? So if I run this again, don't tell us this user is tired of all this, because of course, the first condition did not work, the second condition did. This user is a typical Nigerian. All right, so I hope you understand the point. If the age is greater than or equals 45, then if else if the age is greater than or equals 41, then else you have the final option here. Now remember, you can actually have multiple options here. You can keep having the else if option. Let's take this to a different line, just to um, I can show you how we could extend. We can have like multiple else ifs. Don't do this, right? This is not very good. But just just so you know, it is actually possible to do this. It's better to avoid working that way from the early stage, so you don't get used to it. I'll prefer you use the switch statement. It makes more sense when you have like a lot of conditions this way. Some other programming languages, have something they call enum, and you can use enum to make these things work. But eventually, you would get to work with TypeScript, and you would also probably have a better pattern to implementing your conditionals. Yeah, your conditionals. All right. So this is basically your if else if. I'm not going to use a lot of explanation again. I don't think we need this. This is fine. This is a very simple example, and when you start working with some of these conditions in a real scenario, you would get to explore more. So we've covered the if code, the if else code, the if else if code, and the switch statements, right? So the next item on our list right now would be loops. Let's talk about loops, okay? So I'm basically going to explain loops, but I'm going to do that in a file that I would call the for loop, right? .ps. Okay, so when talking about loop, a simple example is saying you have a specific condition, right? So you have a specific condition, and what you want to do with this condition, I would prefer to show this example. Let me see. Can I share multiple screen? I doubt. Okay, but that's fine. I'm going to show you an example on Excalibur. Let's just do a quick, visual explanation. So give me a minute. I'm sharing my screen again. I need to share a different browser. All right, great. Okay, so yeah, I believe you can see this. So let's talk about loop. So let's assume you have an actor. So you have an actor. You have an actor. Let's call this actor A. I need to zoom in on this. Sure. All right. And when we describe a loop, is basically says it basically means having something having kind of like an iteration, right? You're having kind of like an iteration. Something is repeating, the action is repeating itself until a specific condition is met, right? And yeah, so that is what we're going to explain here. So you have a condition. This is an actor, more like a person, or like an action, and something is going to happen if condition. So we're going to have condition A, right? So a simple example, to explain this is using a while loop, right? So we can say while condition A, so while condition A perform action. So we can say while condition A is not true. I think that makes more sense. So while condition A is not true. A very simple one here, okay? So let's just say while in here. So while condition A is not true, and I'm trying not to, come up with something very complex. So this is quite straightforward. While this is not true, continue to perform this action, right? Now this is a simple example. Why this is not true, continue to perform this action. We can also say why this is true, continue to perform this action. That is very possible. Now this is a typical, example. So if it's not true, perform this action. Now eventually, if it becomes true, it means it's no longer going to perform this action. I am sure you understand what I mean. So if this is not true, perform this action. Now, if that is the condition, it means if it becomes true, stop performing this action. So, while it's performing this action, in between, you can also choose to perform a bunch of actions. So here's a typical example. I'm going to say while A is not equal to, and this is not JavaScript, okay? This is just, we call this pseudocode. So just an example I'm showing you right here. Okay, so I said while a is not equals 10, I want you to print. So basically, it looks more like Python, but let's change this to console.log. Print say print count. So we have, let's assume we have like count equals 0 by default. This is the first value, and then we'll say while a is not equals 10, console.log count, or we can first say count, equals count plus 1, right? And then console.log count, which means it's going to continue printing the value of count, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. And while that is increasing, we also want the value of a, right, to also increase. And yeah, so because we basically want to get somewhere. If you don't have a condition to stop that particular loop, it's going to loop forever, which is not something we want, of course. So I just said while a is not equals 10, print is going to print the value of count, but we probably also want to increase the number of a, so that a would continue to increase until it gets to 10, right? So once it gets to 10, the loop will stop. Okay, so I'm also going to say a equals a plus 1. So let's also assume that a is probably at 5. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So let's say equals 5. All right, so we have 2 items here. We could have just used a simple, just one item, but it doesn't matter. This is fine. So we have count equals 0. We have a equals 5. And we said while a is not equals 10, a should increase, count should increase, and we want to print out count. So it's going to show the incremental, stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Then we're going to say, yeah, so we have our condition. So the moment a gets to 10, this is not going to run. The moment a gets to 10, this is not going to run. Now, this is a very typical example. Looking at the flow we have here, we said while it's not true, perform this action. So take a look at this. Right now, a is not 10, of course, which means this is not true. So it's going to keep repeating this block. It's going to the first stage is going to come here to check. It will say, all right, so is a equals 10? The answer is false, right? So false. It's going to check. Is a equals 10? It's false. So if it's false, what happens here? A is going to be incremented by 1. So which means a is going to become in that first iteration, a becomes what? 6, right? Now it's going to come again to like the second iteration. Let me put this in here like this, so we can follow up with the explanation. So this is what we have right now. So this is the first, this is the first run. Now the second run is going to say, okay, is a equals 10 now? The answer is going to be false again, and it's going to be a is going to become what? 7, right? The third iteration, is a equals 10, false. A is going to be 8. Now the fourth iteration is a equals 10, false. A is equals what? 9. Now the fifth iteration is a equals 10. Nope, it's still false because it's 9. Now a is going to be 10. Now when it gets to the sixth iteration, is a equals 10. True. And it's going to what? Pick. Let's put this again. You get the point? When you're working with a while loop, it's always going to run first, which means you're going to have at least one execution, right? So the first execution is false, it increments to 6. The second execution is going to repeat continuously until that particular condition is met. Now, if you don't have a way to increment the value of a, it means a is going to be 5 forever. It means this is going to run forever, probably until your computer crash or something. But yeah, you can actually cancel some of the there are ways to terminate the process. I mean, if you are running this as a program, of course. Okay, so I'm showing you this visual example, and I hope you understand this. This is for your while loop, if you're using a while loop. Now, another example is when you're using a for loop. It's also an iteration, but it works differently. So an example of a for loop, we're going to write code, don't worry. I'm sure some of us are saying, which one are we using paper. Don't worry, we'll definitely write code. So when you're using a for loop, let's assume we have a specific value somewhere here. I'm going to basically just copy and paste this, and let's move it down here. So we have let's say we have 10. So someone said, I thought the block of code would not run if the block is false. No, so I don't think that is not. Okay, so that is not, so you need to understand, the way true and false work. You can actually use a falsy condition to execute a block of code if that is what you want, right? So you can check and say, okay, I want this to run when this is actually false. Do you understand? So it depends on what you're checking, and probably you would understand before the end of the session, Zedik. Okay, so we have let's call this length, right? Let's call this length, or let's just call this A. Okay, let's call this A. So I'm going to say for A, okay, I think that is that easy enough. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so let's just say for A, or let me just take this off and do it in a single place. So I'm going to say for let A equals 0, and I'm then going to say A is less than 10. So I am automatically defining my length. I would explain this right now. So I'm then going to say like A A plus plus. Now this is the typical way to explain the for loop before we get to use it in JavaScript. In JavaScript, there are multiple ways to work with it. There are simplified ways, and I'll tell you about different patterns. But this is kind of like standard. Okay, so console dot log. So if you take a look at this code, what we have right now, we are declaring a loop, but we want this to, we want the iteration to keep moving until, so long A is less than 10, right? So the iteration will keep moving. And what exactly is that iteration? We are saying A plus plus, which is A should become 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. But the moment it gets to it gets to 9, because we want it to be less than 10, it's going to continue printing until it gets to that specific number. So let me just show you what I mean in practical, of course. So 1 minute, and I'll do that. I have to share my screen. So I am currently switching my screen. Let me do that. And yeah, I'm sorry I have to. I was actually expecting I could share multiple screens. Okay, so back to the window, my VS Code environment share. All right. So I just copied the code and I pasted it in here, right? So I just copied it from, this is exactly what we did right now, and I pasted it in here. So you can say we're saying for let A equals 0, and we're saying if, this is the condition basically, A has to be less than 10. This is what we want. If we want it to be less than 20, if we want it to be less than or equal to 20, that works as well. And we want to increment this, which of course we can even say increment by 2 if that is what you want to do. But right now, A plus plus is going to increment this by 1, right? So wherever you see A plus plus, plus plus basically means plus 1, okay? Especially of course if it has like a variable assigned to it. So if you have like let A equals 1, and we say console.log A plus plus, this is going to basically print what? The value of 2, right? That is what you're going to have here. But let's work with our example now. So for let A equals 0, which is the initial, this is the, we have both the declaration of the variable and the initialization in the same place. So this is the initialization of this variable. And we're saying while A is actually less than or equals 20, so do not exceed this, okay? We're incrementing by 1, and we're printing out the entire value within the block, right? So this is where we basically put in our operation. This is what we want to do. All right. So if I run this, the for loop, we're basically going to print down to 20. And the reason for that is because we said less than or equal to 20. If I say less than and I print this, we're going to have 19, because less than 20, which means don't get to 20, okay? You have to be less than 20, which means you should be 19. Looking at the number system, of course, 1920, right? So if I drop this to 5, definitely when I run this, you're going to get 4, right? You're going to get 4. 0 to 4, your count starts from 0, of course. I mean, it's going to first print the initial value. If I have less than or equals 5, then yes, you're going to have 0 to 5, right? So this makes sense, I believe, and this is easy to understand. Okay. Now, the reason why I was telling you there are other ways to work with the for loop. JavaScript in JavaScript we actually have so let's assume we have an array, right? So this is an array of items. I'm basically going to say let country equals yeah. So I'm going to have like the name of the country. Okay. This is an array of objects. I'm sure you know what objects are. If you don't, this is an object, and I just want to have like multiple countries here. I'm going to have just Nigeria and Ghana. Ghana. Okay. So you can actually use a for. It's kind of like it's a for loop, but basically it's a wrapper around the main for loop. So it's going to I can say for this in country, and I hope I'm not doing oh yeah, this is wrong. It has to be like this. Sorry, I was doing it the Python way. That is not correct. So you can actually say country just like this. Each country. We console.log tree.name. Okay. So now this is a very simple way to look through, a list of objects, right? Now this is considered as the standard for loop. This is what you need to know, at least to understand how for loop works, right? And I'm sure you get the point. I also said that you could actually change the way you want this to, act here, okay? So I can basically say +2, +3, which means increment by 5 times, not by 1. Increment by 2 times, not by 1, okay? So you can do that here. Now, if we have something like this and we're working with the for each, the for each pattern, this is going to basically print out, the country and the name, right? The name of the country. If you have maybe like latitude and longitude, those kind of stuff, right? So let's just say lat long. And I'm going to put a random number here, okay? Very, very random. I have no idea what the lat long would be, but yeah, so let's assume this is what you have in here. You can basically go ahead to even print that out, right? So what you are seeing here is we're basically calling the array, which is this array, and we're saying for each, which means for each of the items in the array. We then created this item. It must not be country. It's just the naming convention I use. I can call it data. I can call it items, right? I can call it elements. It doesn't matter. This particular one is just kind of like an index. Okay, we're using this to index the items. So then I have to use this index, alongside. So if I create the index and I call it elements, I'm basically going to print out the elements, which include the name and the lat long value. Okay. So if I print this, you see we have the name and the lat long, and of course you can also put that together on the same line. That would make more sense. So there are different. We refer to this as iterables, which is what you heard me mention that earlier. So iterable. So it's an iterable or iterable, if that is what you would call it, because we're basically iterating over a list of items. So this is also iterating over something, but basically it's iterating over something based on the condition we gave it. All right. So, but in this case, we already have data. So in the real world, when you're working with loops, this is probably what you'll be using most of the time. And you would use this, probably less often, but you would use this more. Okay. So this is what you would use more. I just went through this array and I took some of these items. As a matter of fact, if we want to use this pattern, then we basically have to work with the length, because I mean, take a look at this. We already know the length. We gave it a fixed length. What if you're working like on something, you don't know what the length is? Maybe the length is coming from a database, right? You don't really know, and you can't add a fixed length, except that is something you really want to do. But probably you want to fetch all the records, but you don't know what the length is. So I mean, in most cases, you would probably get the length of the item. So it's more like saying you fetch the record. You want to fetch some records from a database and iterate over those records using a for loop. You have to fetch the record. get the length of the record, so that within your for loop, you can then use the length of that record. So if we assume that the record, this is the record, just like a mock, right? So let's record equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we're just assuming that this is the record from our database, which of course is an array of items. Okay, and I'm then going to say for a equals 0, then a is less than record dot length. So you can actually do that. Say a plus plus, which means iterate, through these items one after the other. You get my point? So next, I'm simply going to print the record. I'm going to print the items of the record while assigning a. If I go ahead to print this, let me comment this out. If I go ahead to print this right now, and I hope this, let's see if that works. Of course, it works. Now you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're basically picking these items one after the other. My point? That is what we're doing. If I change the value here, let's assume I add a new value and I call this apple. Of course, we can mix up, the numbers and strings in JavaScript arrays. So if I print this again, you see we have apple right here. Understand that? You see we have apple. Now we don't know what the length is, right? We are only collecting the length from the array. Okay, so in a real scenario, these are the kind of things you do because you don't have a fixed length, for the for loops, right? Or you'll be working with, this kind of data, and this is basically what you'll be doing with this kind of data. So I'll just move this, to a different file, so that when you have access to this, to be easier for you. We call this for each loop, right? Because it's actually for each. Okay, so if I run the for each loop right now, so for each, let's see what we have. So it's telling us not a number. Now something is wrong, of course, something is definitely wrong. So let's try to figure out what the problem is. So I'm using the hyphen item here. This is basically going to act as minus. That is not what we intend doing. So instead, I want this to be like a string, a single string that would carry both values. So I'm going to basically use a template literal. This is what you call a template literal because you want it to print out on a single string. Okay, so something is wrong here, and that is the problem. So fix it. So when we run this now, you see we have the country and the lat long on the same line. So this is just an example I want you to understand. This is for each, and this is the for loop. And back to the initial example where we knew the length. This is what we had then. So we had a fixed length just like this, and we set the items, the value of the length. So this is when you have a fixed length, and this is when you do not have a fixed length. So you basically collect the length using the length operator. So this is for loop. Okay, this is for loop, and I'm going to simply jump into talking about while loop, which is the last option we have there. While loop. JS. Now, before we talk about while loop, I know I've said a lot, and I'm trying as much as I can to break it down. But I'm very sure maybe it's still looking complex to some of us. So please let me know if what I've done so far looks complex to you, right? Let me know. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the while loop. Remember, I gave an example. I told you that example, of course, is not even expected to really work because that was just a pseudocode. Yeah, so let's see what we need to do instead. Okay, so I just copied I copied the example from the diagramming software, and I just pasted it in here so that we can make some adjustments, to make it work. All right, to make it work. So I think we have one last item there, which was the let a equals 5. All right, so this is, correct. So now we have let count equals 0, let a equals 5. This is exactly what we did initially. And if we are to test this, without making more changes, so let's see. I mean, that works. I mean, the change, the adjustment was quite easy, right? So let me explain what we have here again. So initially I said let count equal 0. We want the initial value of count to be 0. And then I said let a equals 5. right? We are going to use A as our condition, right? So we're going to use A to basically check for the condition we want to create. Now we created that condition in here by saying while A is not equals 10, while A is not yet 10, because we know A is 5 already. So while it is not 10, A should automatically increase, of course, because we want it to get to 10. If this line of code is not here, this is going to run around. Like basically, it is going to run forever. So count is just going to continually increase, as you can see. So I quickly have to stop this because if I don't stop it, it's going to basically freeze my, my entire system, right? So you see, because I did not have like a stopping point, it kept increasing. It kept increasing until it got to 90, I think 9,000, numbers in less than a second, basically. So let me bring this back in because this is going to determine when we stop. All right, this is going to determine when we stop, and you definitely want to, have a stopping point. Now, the only scenario where you might want to, have uh, um, your code running, or you want your code to run infinite, is probably when you are implementing some sort of a cron job. So you want to have something running on the background as a process, and once it gets to a specific time, something should always happen. Yes, you can actually use a while loop to implement something like that, but please don't make a mistake of running a while loop if you don't want to have like a background process running, continuously, just like that. You must make sure you have a point at which you break that, that loop, right, within your condition. So if I say 100, this is definitely going to print down to on. So we stopped at 95, and of course, I'm sure you get the points because we started from 5. Okay, so that's why we stopped at 95. We started from 5. So that is very much expected because count is at 0 and we're printing count. So it's basically going to print till it gets to 95. It's not going to get to 100 because A already started from 5. Now, this is a very simple implementation of the while loop. You can also use the while loop, to work on, more advanced, use case. But for a start, this is good for you. And if you have any question, around working with the while loop, I'll take your questions already. And I hope you enjoyed this session. So please throw your questions at me so we can tackle some of them as fast as possible.
Okay, Mav. Well done. I think you have some questions here, or we have taken all the questions.
Yeah, so I think I actually answered that specific question, but let me go through that again. So Zedek was asking because he said if block is false, it will not run. So instead, I would go ahead to show you what I mean. So you can actually use a falsy condition. So we have like a truthy condition or a falsy condition. So based on the way you want it to work, you can actually use it to to run something. So for example, if you're looking at my screen, I'm basically going to say we have a value. So I'm going to use a Boolean operation right now. So we have a let is marriage. So let's just quickly prototype something. So true, and I'm going to basically say this is not, come on. Okay. So I'm going to say John is married. Okay. Now I'm simply going to say if John is married, so log John is married. So based on your example, based on what you've said already, let me move this away from here into a new file. I'm going to call it true false .js. That's all once we're done. So node true false of JS. So of course John is married because this is true, right? Which is why it's working. If it's false, this will not work, which is exactly your point. All right, but let's switch things up here. So I'm going to say if not John is married, right? So I mean, let's see what happens here. So you see nothing happens because I basically added the not operation. So we're saying if John is not married automatically because we added this option here, right? Now what if we have else? So, looking at the way you defined when you said, if it's not, if it's false, that is not the best, that's not the best way to look at it. So, if you're looking at what's happening here, my first item said if John is not married, which means I negated the whole thing here. So you have the positive and you have the negative. This is the default, right? What if I change this to false here? It's going to switch things up, right? It's going to switch things up because I'm using a Boolean operator, to match up what I expect to see. All right. So that is what is happening here. So if I run this again, so let's see what we have. Now we're having John is married. I changed this to false. I said if John is married, remember initially, oh yeah, I have to change this to John is not married actually. Run this again. So John is not married. So because I changed this to false, right? So someone is asking, can you explain more before each statement? I'll do that shortly. So if you look at what is going on here, let me see. You said let a equals, okay, let a equals 5, a is not equals 10. Is this true or false? True, I guess. So your question is let a equals 5. Let a equals 5. Now, if a, okay, a is not equals 10, no, yeah. So don't get me, don't be confused at what I'm explaining actually. So I'm trying to tell you that the way you explain a specific thing is different from the way the computer would actually read that operation. Now we're looking at negating our value. So if this is falsy based on our explanation, do not try to explain a process or like the program as if you're a computer because you're not. Of course, you think like you think the way the computer would read some of these things. But remember that when you're working when you're coding or when you're building something, it has to be something you can relate as a human being, okay? Because that is what you are. All right. So Zedic. So when you are reading this, the question is if this is true, right? This is basically your question. Now, if someone is trying to go through this process, the question is, okay, is this actually true or false? Right? If someone is trying to go through the process. Now, what if you have false here? The question now is this true or false? That's the question I'm asking you. So don't look at what you have assigned here. Now answer the question, is this true or false? Right? So I think I understand what you're trying to say now, but that is not the way you explain something to to someone trying to understand what you're learning, or basically explaining something to a student, right? You're basically looking at it from the angle of what is going to be what exactly is the case. So in a business case, you are asked to do something. In a business case, you are asked to perform a specific operation, and you're told that if the boss is around, do this. If the boss is not around, do this. The way you think about it, don't try to think as if you are the computer doing its job, okay? Think about it as you would think about a normal process. It will be better for you that way long term, because you need to understand that if you have done what we call decision trees, or if you did logic gates, you are forced to think that way. Thinking when something is truthy or falsy, or when you have false, something that you have like false and true, or true and true. We'll definitely get to during your mentoring session after the program. We will dive deep into data structures and algorithm, the logics, and basically how to model business scenarios. I would explain further, but for now, please, to be on the safe side, when you're thinking about this, think about the positives and the negatives. Don't assume that when something is negative, you are thinking the way the code would think and assume that that is the positive scenario. So please don't do that, okay? All right, but I get your point. I get your point. Thank you. I think I saw one question I missed. Yeah, so can you explain more on the for each statement? So let me quickly delete this because we're not going to share that. So the for each loop, which is what I have here. Okay, so yeah, who asked the question? Let's see. I'll bring that to the screen. Okay, so that was from Sam. Okay, so Sam, when you're working in a real environment and you're trying to read some data, maybe coming from your database or from an endpoint, when we learn together for some time, we would work together with like APIs. We'll fetch some records. When you fetch those records from the internet, you want to go through those records, probably perform things like filtering, to remove some records you don't want and to work with the ones you need. When you're about to go through that record, Of course, you can use the default, for loop. I told you can actually use the default for loop. If you use the default for loop, then you have to work with the length. This is going to be the length. This is basically the wrap. This is basically a wrapper. This is wrapping around for loop. Now, how can you get the same functionality using a default for loop? I will get to that shortly. I'm going to show you because I think it's important that I do that. Okay, so how can you implement this using a default for loop? Now we're using the for each because for each statement makes it easier for you to work with a loop of or a series of data, without having to think about all the building blocks of the for loop. So when I say country.for each, the country here represents the array, right? Which is what you see here. This is an array. This is an array, of course, right? Using the square brackets, and this is an array of objects. You can have an array of numbers, of strings, of objects. I'm sure you know that. Okay. So this is an array of objects, and now we are basically going to loop through the object, which means during the first loop, we're going to get to this block, right? During the second iteration, we'll get to the second block. And if you have 100 blocks, during the third iteration, you get to the third one, the fourth one, just like that. Okay, so these are different blocks, okay? So if you look at this record now, what is the length? The length of this record, of course, you have just 2 items. That is something you should know. You have just 2 items. Don't look at the items like this. Look at the items like this because this is referred to as one item and this is referred to as another item, okay? Because they are objects. All right. So I said the country here represents the array, and now we're saying for each item in the array, right? So for each basically means for each item in the array. Then the element you're seeing there, it can be anything. I can call it item. I can call it sum, right? So for each item in the array, let's call each item sum. That is what I have here. So now I want to print out the sum.name, which is basically going to be the country, all right, the name of the country, because if I say this element is sum, it means sum.name is Nigeria for the first item, and sum.lat.long is this entire string for this, for that same first item, right? So sum.name and sum.lat.long. So when it gets to the first, it's going to run this on every single iteration. So on every single item in the array, this would run. So let me just put a comment here. So on every single item in the array, this would run. So it's going to basically get to the first item and run this. It will get to the second item and run this. All right. So if I try this again, if I say node for each, so that is what happens. On the first item, this is what we have. On the second item, this is what we have. Now, for this thing you're seeing here, don't be confused. This is basically what we call string literal, because we want to embed, the variable, in here. And of course, we can choose to even do that a different way. So we can basically do this and do plus, right? So you can have it this way as well. I mean, this would yeah, you need plus here too. So this would work. And maybe this is something you're used to, but either of them would basically give you the same result at the end of the day. All right. So the other one will just reduce the amount of you using plus here and there. Okay. So that is the point, right? It doesn't really matter how you choose to format this. It's up to you. It's up to you. But let me change this. We don't need to have your name floating around the code. So let's just call this item. So, for the name here, it doesn't matter. It can be data, it can be item, it can be anything, it can be I, it can be A. Please make sure you use something that someone would really understand. Don't use I, don't use A. We used to do that back in the days with C++, but please, as a modern developer, use terms that people would understand even better, okay? All right, so now I said, how will you do this in a for loop? You can basically say, for, let's say, let I equals 0. And, I'm using I here because, this is kind of like, it runs in the blood of the developers. You always want to stick to more like an index. So I basically would stand for index here, all right? So we say let I equals 0, and then we have the length. The length of our item would be the country dot length, right? And now we want to go through these items one after the other. So I'm basically going to say, and it looks like this is covering, oh, apologies. Amaka, please, can you leave the stage? Yeah, it's covering, I would also take out the comments. Yeah, okay. So if I say let I equals 0, country.length, and then I have, the I++, it means we're going one step at a time, so this is what I have. This has to be like this. Okay, if I choose to print, so I want to show you something, not print, that is Python, console.log JavaScript. So if I print the item of country bracket I. So let's see what we have. I'm basically going to comment on this first, right? Because this is what we're working with, okay? So if I print this, okay, so this is wrong. This is very wrong. So we have a country dot length. Let's see what's did we make any mistake here? Sure, we don't need that. Yeah, we don't need this. So I need to verify something. Let's see. Console.log country dot length. Probably made a mistake somewhere. This is of course correct. Two. Let's check this again. Oh yeah, so that was a mistake. I has to be less than country dot length. Please don't make that mistake. All right, so I'm sure you noticed that I forgot to put the length, so it's kind of like it started running continuously, which is what I told you to avoid. All right, so you can see what we have right now. Right now we have the entire object. So let's assume you want to collect the item just the way I explained earlier. We can just grab that with the name, right? And we can also grab so we can say plus minus just like this, which is the item, plus again, and then we can replace this again, country dot what? This time it's going to be the last long, right? So this is a bit longer, but if I run this, just to see what we have right now, if I run this, we're basically going to get, the same value or the same results that we got earlier. So I hope you understand this, right? So the for each is more like a wrapper to make things easier for you without having to think of the complexity here. Just to be sure that you can see my screen. Yes, you can see my screen. Okay, so let's see. Can we have more explanation on the for loop? Okay, I just did that now. Um, Request. Okay, can instructors please tell us the shortcut keys they use during the code? For example, when the instructor commented out the old blocks. Okay, I think I actually forgot. I intentionally downloaded a tool that would show you some of the commands I am running or I am using. But the thing is, I'm actually using a MacBook, so the command might not work the same way you're using it, except you're also using a MacBook. When it comes to commenting out some of those codes, I just have to highlight, just like this. I highlight this way and I use a command, the command with the slash sign, right? The forward slash. So the forward slash will do this, right? If you're using a Windows machine, then you would use control. Yeah, you would use control. All right. So yeah, well, we can't always tell you all the shortcuts, but if you ask, I will definitely tell you. And remember, I am always active on Discord, or probably when I am active on Discord, you can ask your questions. I will definitely answer you. You can also ask the AI bot on Discord. It will definitely do a good job of explaining even better. So which of these methods is modern way of looking through an array? The for each loop is actually preferable. The for each loop is better because this is more complex. If you look at it, the for each loop is quite better. The for each loop is just a wrapper around this. So the for each loop is also doing this. All right. So the for loop is the standard for loop that you need to know and understand, and just use the for each loop in your code base. Okay. All right, so I think that is all. Thank you, guys. I hope you learned something from this session. Going forward, we'll definitely have more sessions to explain even better. I will push this code base right now to GitHub, and I'll share it with you in your Discord room. And I also noticed the room is very quiet. Please, you have to collaborate. Have different sessions. Jump on the Hangouts. Learn from each other, because we actually have something coming up. There will be an announcement this weekend, probably by tomorrow. And it's actually a big announcement. Make sure you sign your attendance. It is very important. Amaka, please, over to you. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Amaka, are you speaking?
Oh, sorry. I thought I muted myself. Sorry about that. So, hi guys. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mav, for your teaching. So, guys, if you're yet to fill the attendance form, please go ahead and fill it. You can find it in the chat. Just scroll up, you would see it. If you are yet to follow us on Twitch, kindly follow us on Twitch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a big announcement coming up, so please be active in your room and keep an eye on the announcement channel. Have a great day, everyone. See you by 8 p.m. today. Bye, guys.